Unless you live in Indiana, the terrain is one of the most remarkable features of your environment. But how do we build something like this? Well, fortunately, Unity does give us a great set of tools to build terrain, but are we expected to carve out every single edge of this mountain? Well, you can, and I won't stop you, but there is a better way. Let's take a look at some principles for mathematics, specifically fractal geometry, and see if we can't simplify the process of building complex terrains using simple rules.
Okay, we're back here in Unity, and like I promised, I'm going to give you guys a more condensed version of what we talked about on Wednesday using the terrain tool. So this is going to be pretty quick, just follow along, and if you need, you can pause, rewind, find other sections that you need. So first thing we actually want to do, this should be done because it's going to give you all of these really great, awesome tools and brushes. Let's go to Window, Package Management. Let's go to the Asset Store. What we're looking for here is a tool which is called Unity Terrain URP Demo. And here it is. It's the second one. It's actually free. It says that I purchased it. You'll just see here, it will say add to assets or something like that. We'll click open in Unity, and that should immediately link into Unity. So for you, you will probably just need to click download. For me, I've already downloaded it, so it's a matter of importing. So go ahead and download, and then pause the video, wait for it to say import, and then click import, and this also takes a little bit of time. So I'm going to pause the video here so that you don't have to wait. You'll do the same thing, just pause the video, and as soon as it's done importing, we'll move on to the next step. Okay, not too bad, that didn't take too long. We're going to take everything, so make sure you have all, or just check that everything is selected. By default, it should be, so we're just going to click import. And what this is adding to our project is a ton of different brushes, a ton of different terrain layers, a ton of different assets that we can also use as details in our environment. This is super handy because by default, you don't have any types of detail to add to your environment, and the brushes are there, but they're limited. So you just get a few primitive kind of shapes, some diffuse brushes. This is going to add a lot more, and it's going to make building terrains a lot easier and a lot more natural as well. So I'm going into my scene, brand new project here. Let's right click in our hierarchy over here in some gray space. Let's do 3D object, create a terrain. And you'll notice on the right side that we can click activate this inspector. That's going to let us control this terrain. Let's click on the very first one here. This actually lets us create neighbor terrains. And so you'll notice all the green lines extending out from our first terrain. Let's create 3 more. Just click on those areas. You'll also notice it's created terrain data down here, so we probably want to organize this somewhere. I've already created a little folder for terrains. Let's just take those, put that in a new folder. If you don't have that folder, just right click, do create. Let's create a folder and call it terrains. That way these can just flood your project, and if you don't know what they're associated with, it's kind of a headache to find out. They're not exactly named anything intuitively. So for now, we have our terrain. It's extended out in each direction. Notice that the origin is actually at the center of all of the terrains here. So this is our origin right here. Let's activate the terrain. And if you recall, we have a few different types of ways that we can modify the height of this terrain. So we can set the height, we can paint holes, raise or lower, we can stamp the terrain, and we can smooth it. Let's look at each of these. So set height is pretty useful as a first step because you might want to have a certain height to your terrain. If you only want to go up in your terrain, that's probably fine if your terrain is sitting at 0, but if you want to dig into your terrain, you can't do that until you've raised your terrain. So you can't go below 0, you can't go into bedrock, and so essentially we want to raise this up by, let's say, 100. That gives us at least 100 units of ground to work with below us in case we want to dig down or underneath. So we could just select 100 here, and if we click flatten tile, that would technically flatten it to the point of 100. You can see now this is much higher than the other ones. Let's just click flatten all, and that'll take all of the terrain. Now they're all at 100. So the advantage here is when we go into set the height or to raise or lower, we can actually dig into this terrain. So we could also use this set height not just to create a baseline, but we could actually use it to draw in the world. So you notice that your cursor has already become a blue paintbrush. We can set our brush size. We can also do that up here. Your opacity can be changed. You do have the option to change your brush size here, but here's what you'll notice is it's already way off scale. Like this is huge, and even going down to nearly the very bottom is still huge. So I recommend just changing your brush size over here. Yeah. So okay, let's have a brush size of something like 10. That's reasonable. Opacity is going to be the strength of the brush, and that has a few different implications depending on what type of tool you're using, whether you're setting height, raising or lowering, or if you were perhaps painting on textures. So opacity is typically the strength of whatever you're using. Okay, so you'll probably notice now, or maybe you didn't, because you didn't realize that all of these are given to you by the asset pack that we just downloaded from the asset store. So these are great. These can be used in many different ways. It looks like this could be used to carve out a river, maybe a gorge of some sort, and look into that. For now, let's just look at the very simple operations of the brushes. So we're using set height. So of course we just set everything to 100, meaning using this at that level is not going to do anything. I could technically say 105, and now we'll raise everything that we drag on up to 105. So you'll see all this does is set to that height. It won't raise anything above 105, so this is exactly 105 in world space. Let's say that I said 100 again, then this would actually bring it down to 100. Let's say that I chose a different type of brush, and let's go to 110. Brush size up a little bit. Notice how we get a little bit of a distribution here. This is more like a hill rather than just a direct set. And so that has to do with the type of brush we're using. You can see this is a little binary mask. This texture just defines how strong this effect occurs. And so when we have these more diffuse types of brushes, we can build a lot of different diverse types of shapes. And these are available not only in the terrain, but when we're painting terrain and even when we're adding details like trees and flowers. So it's great to have a diverse set of these brushes. And as you'll notice, kind of like I mentioned in the class, it's no accident that these happen to look like fractal patterns. If you notice, the edges of these happen to look like a shoreline, maybe, or a fern, or they're self-similar. That means these are useful patterns at any scale. So you can almost imagine how you could build a continent just by doing this. I'll undo that now. So now that we see a little bit about how many different brushes we can use, how the brush size influences that and the opacity, let's look at the, one more thing to mention about set height, actually, something very useful to know about set height, is that you can hold shift and click at any point to sample that and set that as your new height. So 102, let's say that I made it 120. I want this to be just moderately impactful. Okay, so if I hold shift, click down here, now we're back at 100. I could hold shift and click at the top of this. Now we're back at, let's see, 106. That's apparently what it thinks. We could also dig into the ground here. Since we have that, we know that our base is at 100, so we could say 90. And notice it's never going to go any lower than 90. It's never going to go any higher either. Okay, so maybe we wanted to make like small steps. This wouldn't really be the most effective way to do it, but it makes the point that all you're doing is really setting it to that height. Okay, holes are not used so often, but they can be useful in some cases. You can see all it does is it kind of cuts away from the terrain. One of the reasons you might use a hole is, let's say that you want to turn this into some type of mine that the player has stepped through or is part of the environment. We can cut out part of the environment. Maybe that would be too large. This puts it on us then to create some more geometry around here. Maybe you have a 3D model, but at least that way the player is going to be able to see down here instead of having some like fake wall in front of it or fake door in front of it. That's sometimes not very convincing. And so you might actually have to cut away from the terrain. Its uses are niche and varied, but it's good to know that you can do this. For the most part, you won't have to do this. So if we hold shift, we can actually repair the terrain. So most of these tools, when you hold shift, will perform the opposite, which is either to raise, lower, add, or remove. So here, speaking of raising and lowering, pretty much your bread and butter type of brush This is where opacity, you might want to change it a little bit, because if you want things to be gentle, you'll see that it very quickly will culminate into some feature in the terrain. So pretty low, and you might even just be dabbing it on a little bit, just clicking, adding a tiny bit. It can very quickly pile up if you drag your mouse too far and too fast. Okay, so now we're going to look at these stamps. The stamp can be a little bit confusing. The reason is because it has a few settings that kind of counteract each other. It's usually best with the stamp to have your opacity set to 100. Set your max and add over to 1. This ranges between 0 and 1. What this does is it will only add to what you are stamping, and this will make a little bit more sense if I have a pattern that kind of is easier to track. So this star is easy to use. So I'm going to click here. We stamp upwards because we left click. We could hold shift and stamp downwards, make a hole. Let's say that we wanted to fill in this. Let's say that we made this hole and we actually wanted this to entirely be underground. We could just grab this here, this brush. We could go to our set height. We could grab a height that's in here, shift click to sample. Now I can kind of repair this from the top, and maybe I want to move the camera around a little bit. The nice thing is that I'm at 100% opacity, and so it's just going to force that terrain down to a height of 90, which we sampled. So it's kind of a quick way to repair that. Another way you might do this is just be creating a brush where this entire star is filled in with white. So you could use a photo editor in any way that you prefer. Create the new brush, and then that's yours. So all of these are just grayscale. You just white means maximum effect, black means no effect, and it can be diffuse. So kind of like we might set the world lower in this way. Since we're selecting 90, it's going to pull down. Let's go back to stamp, and let's take a look at something like this. We have a hexagon. Stamp with left click, lower with shift left click. And so these can actually kind of compound. So if I put this in between here, we've stamped a space which is going to lower that part, bring this one down, and then also lower this one even more. So you can see it's an additive effect. The reason that it's also a little confusing is because you have this subtract slider. What happens is that if you're holding shift, it just inverses. I just recommend that you leave subtract off, that you leave max add to 1. Set this whatever you would like. You can even set it by scrolling, control. And if you do so, you'll notice that it goes down into the negatives, but all it really does is turn on subtract. So control scroll. Okay, so now we can actually use some of these interesting shapes here. This is often how we use the more detailed fractal patterns. So what we'll do, let's grab this one here. Kind of looks like a lightning, but it could be used for a river, for instance. Maybe we could raise this up. I think this would actually make the most sense as a river, kind of a river valley. So if I hit shift, I'm going to bring it down. And that's pretty cool. We could imagine there's probably a river flowing through here. We'll add some water in a little bit. Let's look at the rest of the brushes. So smooth height is also pretty obvious. You probably will want one of these types of brushes. It just makes more sense to have a circular type of brush. I often prefer the diffuse type of brush rather than this like hard edge brush. So we might smooth out this region of the environment. It's quite obvious what it does. You want to be careful about the opacity here as well, because you can see it'll just pulverize some of the features. If you have any type of rugged features that you want to keep, it'll just kind of smooth them all out, and then all you'll really get are rolling hills. Okay. So we've looked at each of these types of brushes. Now we're going to focus on paint texture. So I've already set up a few terrain layers here. What I'm going to do is actually remove them so that it's we'll start from the beginning. We'll do edit terrain layers, add layer. Now, because we downloaded that asset, we have a few different types of terrain layers already created for us. You probably recall in the class when we created it, we had to go through a step of creating the terrain layer, assigning some albedo maps and normal maps. So These came with the project. That's the nice thing about it. These are terrain layers that are already ready for you to use. Let's select Grass B, and it's going to automatically apply it to our scene. The cool thing about this, you'll notice, is that the grass is pretty textured. It almost looks mossy. It looks like you have some actual detail on the earth. You can see the dirt, some good detail. That's because this layer, if we select this layer, has its diffuse map, which is just its color map, and it also has the normal map. The normal map gives it details, tells the renderer how to reflect light, even though we are not making any changes to the geometry itself. And you can tell this based on if I were to set the normal scale down a little bit. Let's do this. I could either remove the normal map or I can set this normal scale down. Let's set that down to 0. You can see it looks a little more bland. It looks a little smooth. The grass just kind of looks like a color texture. It's not terrible, but normal maps are really what elevates your environments into looking real, and they come at very, very little cost. So value of 1, yeah, it looks like we have some detail. Value of 2, definitely we have some detail. So our eyes are so sensitive to this type of lighting that this is immediately one way to elevate the realism of your environment. Okay, so we have plenty of other terrain layers we can add. Let's add something like we got some cliff mountains, black sand rocks. We'll do this black sand. So we can just paint in. You'll notice that the whole terrain turned the first color that we added. When we added this Grass B, the whole thing became grass. This is now when we want to go through and start painting in other layers. So if I select the sand, we can start painting in the sand. Maybe we want this star to be filled with sand, so I'll lower the brush size. Opacity here kind of has its more traditional sense, and like how much are you adding? How much does it override what was already there? So I'm just holding down left click, I can drag around. If we have really low opacity, we might be able to have more subtle effects, drag it out here without completely overriding it. You can imagine if I brought opacity up to 100, we're just gonna paint directly on and kind of no mercy, the grass is going away. Okay. So you probably also don't want to use any of these other brushes when you're painting terrain. Maybe there's some good uses. For example, this is a diffuse little cloud. Maybe you can have some dirt. I believe that there's a dirt layer. Yeah, here we have some tidal pools. This is a little dirt layer. So maybe we'll up the brush size and lower the opacity because we don't completely want to overwrite, but maybe we want to make an area a little muddy. Oop, I have to select it. So this might make sense. We can be astute about our observations and say maybe if this were a real environment, this is where all the water would run off, and so this would be a very muddy part of the environment. It's up to you to kind of have that distinction, but you can always go back and forth between these other layers if you think maybe it's too muddy and you want just a little bit more grass growing around here. So we can go back with a lower opacity, fix up some of the edges. Maybe a little bit of the rocky terrain here. Just touch those on. Well, maybe too much. You want it to be subtle. This is up to you to decide. Always zoom out, take a look at the environment, kind of evaluate it, zoom back in, see what it looks like. Okay, so we've looked at how to set the height, we've looked at how to paint holes, raise or lower the terrain, how to stamp the terrain, how to smooth the height, how to paint the texture. We've looked at the different types of brush, and let's look at how to add a new brush. Technically, you could just create your own brush if these for some reason weren't sufficient, or you wanted some type of custom brush, maybe to add a specific detail. That's possible. You can just add that texture as a PNG to your project, and you'll find it listed in your project. You could add that as a brush. So, it should probably be black and white. I think that's the only way Unity would accept it. It needs to be grayscale. You, for the most part, aren't going to need to do that, but it's good to know how to do it. Okay, let's look at the procedural terrain generation script. We covered that a little bit in the class. I'm going to do that over on this terrain, neighboring terrain. So let's select the terrain, download the file from Canvas if you don't already have it. Let's click Add Component, and this is called the Procedural Landscape Generator. You can do that, or you can just drag it over from your files. So immediately what we get is a very rough type of terrain. What we want to do is, let's configure some settings, some parameters of this. The scale, this is the scale of the fractal pattern itself, of the noise pattern. So you can kind of see this is what Perlin noise looks like typically. So let's look at some of the other noise. That's billow noise. Let's scale it to about 1. What you can see actually is if we drag on the edges, we can see what this looks like at different scales. So you can see it just kind of infinitely scales. That's what makes this a self-similar fractal. We just infinitely scale up this function. So here's ridged. Also looks kind of cool. So probably what we need to do is change our persistence. Our persistence is going to describe how much. Well, it's difficult to exactly describe what this does, but you'll get a feel for it as you move the sliders around. Persistence is going to be kind of the maximum in regard to the noise and the height of your terrain. We have a few other things that it's just worth playing with rather than me describing perfectly. Octaves, however, are interesting to see. Just like we built some of the terrain over here by piling on those brush shapes, and we can do that at different scales. Octaves are ways of adding more detail, and what it does is adds the same shape but at a different scale. So as we continue to add in more shapes, I'm going to bring down the persistence so this is more evident. What we're doing is adding this exact noise pattern onto itself in smaller scales. We could offset this and you'll see it just slides it as if it's always been there, left and right. It's the same thing. So this is also a deterministic function, meaning you can create the exact same type of noise with the same parameters. Play around with this. That's the best suggestion that I can give you. Perlin noise tends to be quite nice for creating landscapes. You probably want to change your persistence to some degree. Lacunarity is Latin for lake, and it was described as kind of a way to increase or decrease the number of lakes in your environment. Another type of thing that you really just want to slide and get a feeling for what it does, more so than whatever Latin word it means. So octaves here is increasing the octaves is usually a good idea. If you want more detail, increasing the octaves, you'll see always adds smaller, finer details, but up to a certain point. You kind of get diminishing rewards. So if I'm at 5, the details that are being added are so small compared to the previous octave that it just hardly matters. Okay. So I think it's about time that we add some water to this environment. Let's just make a simple plane, and then we'll have it be transparent and blue, and that'll be good enough for now. So let's just create a 3D object. Let's create a plane. Let's scale it up to be just about as large as you can. Now let's create a new material. We should definitely stay organized and create a new folder for our material, which we will call materials. And let's create that material. Let's call it water. Let's also rename this plane. Let's call that water. Good organization starts at the beginning, so eventually you're not going to want to rename all of your objects in your environment, so just do it while you create it. That's my recommendation. So water, let's change the surface type from opaque to transparent. Let's give it a blue tint. And we want to change the alpha channel to be a little transparent. If you didn't change it from opaque to transparent, that alpha channel wouldn't have any impact. So it has to be transparent for this alpha channel to work on a material. Okay, let's drag it on. Looks pretty good, not too bad. Maybe we can change the smoothness a little bit. You know, waves tend to have a little bit of a reflection of the light, so we wouldn't want it perfectly smooth. Let's say that we want to modify this terrain. Let's say that we were making an island, and so we didn't want this terrain to just have edges or seams at the edge here. What we should do here, because our terrain is, well, it did also just add some terrain layers, interestingly. It really shouldn't have, so I'm not entirely sure why. I guess That might have been automatic. Interesting. Let's go down to our script here at the bottom. I'm going to turn off auto update. In fact, if we like our terrain as it is, we probably want to turn this off, because let's say that I did make a change to the terrain here. Let's say I wanted to lower some more parts. Let's make sure I'm at add or yeah. Let's do raise or lower. Let's say that I wanted to lower this. If I go back and rerun this landscape generator, this looks pretty good. But if I auto update, now it's going to get rid of that. It's just going to follow that function. So you probably want to turn off auto update. Another thing we might want to do is, I've already lost those changes, so I'll turn back on auto update. We can have it automatically assign the terrain layers. So the terrain layers, as you remember, are kind of just the textures of sand or grass, snow, or whatever you want to use, gravel. We have some terrain layers already, and that's really nice. We don't have to make them. Let's add in a few of these, and let's kind of start from the bottom because we're going to adjust the start height. So black sand, that can be the lowest point. Okay. Let's add another terrain layer. This one is going to be not black sand, but it's going to be, so we have a grass A, there's a grass B. Grass B looks a little healthier. But actually I kind of like this. This is the tidal pool. That would probably be closer to the water. So we have sand at the very bottom, we'll have a tidal pool. Let's add another one. I'm going to make this one the healthier grass. Okay, I'm going to do that again, and this one's going to be the, actually this is the healthier grass. Either way, we've got them layered in here. Finally, maybe we want some type of rock at the top, some cliff mountain. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And you can immediately see the difference in detail and realism that entails as soon as you add something that has a normal map on it. Our eyes are just so attuned to this. So in the script, let's go back to that. We have the start height for each of these. I'm going to turn off auto update again, only because this will automatically switch the position, and if it's on, that can be kind of wonky. I'll show you. If we have tidal pools here and I bring grass A down, it's going to reorganize it, and that can end up like just causing them to flicker between each other. So I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so we said that black sand was lowest, okay, at 0. So this only goes up to 1, so we're just thinking kind of normalized. Black sand at 0. Tidal pools was going to be a little higher than that. So I'm going to actually rearrange that here, just drag that, keep it organized. Black sand, tidal pools, okay, at about 1/10 of the way. And then grass can be maybe 3/10 of the way there. This is actually the cliff. I'm going to drag that down. And I think also grass B was the healthy looking grass. Let's do that. We essentially just want to create this curve so that as we go up, probably we'll have a larger range where we use grass. And then at the very top, that's the last one, everything at or near 1. Okay, let's turn on auto update. That looks pretty cool. So we have these mountaintops here, which are now automatically getting the rocks. I don't see a lot of the muddy terrain that we wanted, so those tidal pools. So let's kind of shift this up a little bit until we start seeing that. I'm going to drag up the grass. Okay, that looks pretty good. Much more realistic. And so keep in mind that if you modify this right now, like if you paint onto this terrain, it's probably going to get overwritten if you have auto update on, so you could turn that off if you want to make those changes. Keep in mind the script itself is also what's painting on these layers automatically, so you might raise something like this ground here, and it's going to keep that dirt. Whoops, we're not painting on. We are raising or lowering. It's going to keep the dirt there, so the only reason that this was done automatically was because of the script. So if you turn off auto update, you won't be able to expect the layers to obey the height map that we're creating. Great. So play around with this, the procedural landscape generator. It's a lot of fun. You can create tons of different types of landscapes. I personally like ridged, Perlin. Oh wait, we were doing Perlin. Here, this is pretty neat. This is kind of like some, I don't know, volcanic maze path. Would be pretty cool if we added the water, raised it up a little bit. So, you know, a basin of water down below. Maybe you can make it lava down below. Okay, hopefully that has sparked your creativity. So let's look at one topic that we didn't cover in the class, actually, and that is adding details. So in this environment, maybe we want trees and flowers. This one's a little less believable, so let me bring it back to like Perlin noise. I'll bring this down. Let's say also that this was like too extreme of a mountain. We could go into the settings of the terrain. This has a terrain height of 600. We could change that to be something like 200. And now what we get is this lower, smoother terrain. Keep in mind the textures are going to be the same size, so just play with that. But what we want to look at is how to add certain details to our environment. Maybe we want to add trees, flowers, bushes, shrubs, grass, and that's really easy to add in the terrain tool. And there's a ton of reasons why you would want to do this through the terrain tool and not just create the prefabs and spread them around the scene. The first is that adding details through the terrain editor is much more optimized. Unity will handle all of the render distances of these objects, like whether they're trees or flowers or grass. It's much easier to add and remove. And it doesn't clutter your terrain or your hierarchy here with, hundreds if not thousands of game objects. And the other nice thing is that it's going to move along with your terrain. So there is really no sensible reason, unless it's intro to VR, that you're going to be just spreading game objects around as details. So let's show you how to do that. We're going to go over to Paint Trees. We're going to click on Edit Trees, Add Tree. And we should have some trees coming from, let's let this load up a little bit. I think it's going to generate some previews. Yeah, there we go. This tree comes from the asset pack that we downloaded, the URP demo scene. So let's see if we can find some trees. Looks like we have some pines. Ah, nice. I like Pine B. We're going to select that one. All you have to do is get the tree prefab, which is just going to be some type of game object. We'll add it. Okay, so now we have a few settings here. We have the brush size. That's actually the same as what we had before. This is how the trees are going to be painted on. Let's not wait. Let's just click and see what happens, and we get a ton of trees. The reason is because of our density, but you can already see, it's quite a dense forest. Unity is going to handle a ton of these trees. They are completely optimized to work with the GPU, and they are instanced, meaning you really only have to draw one variation of this, and then Unity knows how to draw the rest. It's very optimized. And as you can see, if you had done this in any other way, you would have been positioning and duplicating your tree game objects for hours. The other really great thing about this is that you can even have these little random variables. So the tree density, I'm going to bring that down here just so we can see really clearly. The tree height, random, yeah. And so let's say that we had this really, really varied size of trees. You can have these little, new saplings. You can have really, really tall trees. So let's just keep adding more trees to this environment. It's already starting to look pretty good. You can also do mass place trees. Don't really recommend it, but if for some reason you just want to place a ton of trees out, by all means, it will place trees all over your environment, and then it's essentially up to you to prune those trees. You can do that pretty easily in the same way that Shift was always erase or lower. Shift can get rid of trees in an area, and so maybe we want to add trees, remove trees. Maybe we want to make like a little path through this forest. We'll do that by just mowing down these trees with Shift. Maybe you want to create a little clearing. This is where the fun part of Unity comes in. You essentially just get to start thinking about what makes sense here. Is there a reason, is there a story behind why the environment looks this way? A few other parameters here. I would probably lock the width to the height. You might have some inadvertently strange looking trees if you don't do that, but that's up to you. We can have some color variation in the trees too. So let's say that we added these trees. We get a little bit of variation. Might be hard to tell, but it usually occurs in the leaves. So the next cool thing about trees is that when you play, you'll actually notice that these trees, if I bring my camera over here, Control Shift F, the tree should actually move in the wind. It will animate the trees. This is something you don't get from... Okay. Well, let's do this. What we probably need is a wind zone in our environment. So this is actually next to the terrain. We do 3D object. Let's do a wind zone. This is going to be, I'm going to bring it over here again with Control Shift F. The direction kind of matters. So let's scale this up. Actually, what we want is spherical. So this way we can we have a few options here. Radius, you know, I just set that up to something large so it covers most of the trees. We'll just see what happens. So you can see a little bit of this wind automatically being applied to our trees. Can't get that with a game object. Not a typical game object. So that's awesome. Let's make our scene even more realistic now. So let's create, sorry, let's not create, but let's select our terrain. Let's activate the inspector. Let's go to paint details. So trees are, you'll know a tree when you see it, but there are tons of other details you might want. You might want shrubs. So let's go to paint details, our fourth little tab at the top here in terrain. We don't have any details right now, actually, so what we'll need to do is, just like the tree, we'll do edit details. We can either add a detail mesh or a grass texture. A detail mesh is actually going to be another mesh, preferably something that's not really a tree, so maybe we can find here's a dry bush. That would be pretty good. Maybe you could do rocks. Keep in mind that these tend to not have colliders on them, so when you paint them, that's one of the reasons they're also optimized, is they tend to not have colliders. So if you don't want your player to, or if you do want them to collide with your player, you might consider actually placing them down, but I'm going to select this grass here. And okay, we can align to ground, yep, minimum width, we've got a few things here, noise seed. Those are all fine by me, so let's just add that and see what happens. I'm just going to click and start seeing what happens. Okay. Let's do it a little bit more. So maybe we want the target strength up. Opacity and target strength kind of are kind of equally redundant, and so you might up the target strength, or you could just up the opacity. You'll kind of see that the difference is quite subtle. So opacity, I'm going to make the brush size pretty small so we can see this. Target strength and opacity. You'll also notice that these typically move by themselves. Let's add another detail. Let's actually add a grass texture. So the difference here is that this is going to be a texture 2D, and these are going to be billboard sprites, meaning these pieces of grass will always face the camera that's looking at them. They are a little bit more performant to use. They're not meshes, so they have no 3D geometry, but they can look a little less. Let's see, what do we want to use? Here we are. Probably a texture. They can look a little less convincing. So I need to select the grass. Let's go to a different area. Yeah, here we are. So you'll notice that as I kind of rotate around them, all they do is they follow the direction of the player. But it's pretty optimized. And so here the grass doesn't really match the color of the environment. So I'm going to undo. I can also just hold shift to erase it. Keep in mind it's going to erase any other details you have there. I believe there is a way to only erase the type of detail you have. Let's see, Control Shift, yes. So if you want to just erase your single detail but not erase everything, then Control Shift will erase it and leave everything else safe. So here we have the healthy color and the dry color. I thought it was a little too green, so maybe we'll take this down or make it a little more yellow just to match the color of the environment. That looks much better. You can paint this on, paint this around. This is the type of thing that you can actually work with a really high brush size and just drop it on. Now our scene has grass, it's got trees, it's looking pretty good. Probably one of the other things that you would want to add to this environment, rocks, and so we might just pull those directly out of the assets themselves. Here's some rocks. Let's see what they look like. Pretty cool. Here's an overgrown rock. Great. Cool scale. We'll kind of embed that into the ground a little bit. Right? Just get a feel for what each of these different rocks are like. Maybe we'll rotate them a little bit, place them in the ground. That looks pretty good. This is when you really start having control over your terrain, what types of things you'd like to convey about the environment. Okay, I think this went a little longer than I anticipated, but hopefully you got a lot of new information out of this. If you still have questions, feel free to email me, message me on Discord, let me know during class. Otherwise, good luck on your challenge.